Good morning, everyone, and happy Thursday. Happy second day of the SAMED Summit. I hope that you're all well, that you've had coffee, refreshments. It's good to see you all here. We've had quite an interesting first day, haven't we? We've talked about youth unemployment, we've talked about localization, we've talked about the future of this industry and how we can play our role in advancing it further. And I'm glad to say that those conversations continue on to today. We have a jam-packed schedule for you. We do apologize for starting a bit late, but trust us, we'll more than make up for it. We've got an absolutely interesting conversation that we're just about to start right now on sustainable healthcare. And it's quite fitting, isn't it? When we're looking at the energy crisis that we're currently in, or have been in for quite a while actually, but that we're experiencing right now, and also this move towards a just transition and doing things in a more sustainable way. When we look at the healthcare industry, how can we make sure that we as players and actors in this industry do so in a way that is sustainable for the generations to come? That is what this first panel is all about. What does sustainable healthcare look like? And I'm joined by two exceptional panelists that I'm quite excited to get to know a little bit better. So I'd like you to please join me in welcoming my panelists to stage. Etienne Dreyer, partner at PwC. Let's give him a round of applause as he makes his way up here. And Baloyi, Healthcare Risk Waste Management at the Department of Fisheries and Environment. And for those of you who haven't met me yet, my name is Tanya Habimana. I am an anchor at CNBC Africa, and for today, I will be your MC and moderator. So without further ado, let's get this conversation started. So when we talk about sustainable healthcare, quite a few things pop up. I mean, sustainable healthcare, I'm thinking sustainability across the value chain, manufacturing, but also sustainability in the hospital, sustainable products. So to frame all of this, I'm going to start with you, Etienne. I understand that PwC has done quite some research on this. You actually released a note not too long ago. So perhaps you can start us off by painting us a picture. What are the key trends in sustainability when it comes to healthcare, and particularly the medtech sector?
Sure. Thanks very much, Tanya, and good morning, everyone. I think it's very important that we do contextualize what we mean by sustainability, as you rightly said. We conducted a research piece where we interviewed 30 of the top healthcare executives in South Africa, and we started unpacking what they believe sustainability in the healthcare sector is and what their organizations are doing with regards to that. Not surprisingly, South Africa follows much of the global trend whereby the healthcare sector globally is actually lagging most of the other sectors with regards to sustainability. And when I say sustainability, I'm talking about E, S, and G, so your environment, your societal impact, as well as your governance impact. So when we unpacked with a lot of the leaders why the healthcare sector is lagging on all three of these pillars, very often the CEOs said that, well, healthcare is seen as a public good, and they've for so long seen that they are doing their service to society in any event, and they're contributing in that way, so they haven't placed an emphasis on what sustainability means, what the environmental impact means, and focus their organizations in this manner. Only approximately 30% of our survey showed that healthcare organizations in South Africa are focusing on sustainability efforts, and specifically with regards to renewable energies, renewable sources, recycling of healthcare waste. But the majority of the impact and the climate impact which the healthcare sector globally applies onto the problem that we have, the societal problem, is the transport and logistics and the movement of products around the world. That is the number one cause of what the healthcare sector has been flagged for as being probably lagging behind other sectors. And this is really what a lot of the healthcare organizations that we spoke to are starting to focus on, is not only their organization and, as you said, in the hospital space and in their organization, but what does that extended supply chain and logistics plan and the impact that that has on society, how can that start being controlled and start having a positive impact on sustainability?
Sure. 30%.
Yeah.
That's quite low.
Yeah, it is low.
So, sorry, there's one thing I forgot to say. In your app, you would have seen Michelle Govender. She couldn't join us today, so Christelle is very kindly stepping in for her. So, Christelle, from your perspective, one of these items is recycling healthcare waste. What does that look like from a waste perspective? What are the main issues that we're experiencing?
Yes. Thank you, colleagues. My name is Baloyi from the Department of Environment, Fisheries, and Forestry. As she said, my chief director was supposed to be here, but she couldn't make it today due to some other commitments. Thank you, Etienne, for your question. Recycling in terms of, waste. It's we see a lot of waste treatment facilities that are involved in the business of recycling waste management. They are trying to beneficiate the waste that they treat. So they are looking at recovering the glass, especially when we check at non-combustion technologies, because we got two types of main technologies to treat healthcare risk waste, which is combustion and non-combustion technologies. So we see from non-combustion technologies, they try from the residual waste, they try to beneficiate the materials that come out from that process, like the glass, the metals, the plastics, and then they take some of the waste that with a high calorific value, they try to cooperate with cement producing facilities like your cement kilns, because the cement kilns are operating at a high temperature, so they are able to deal with those materials. So yeah, we're seeing a lot of those recycling initiatives from the waste management industry.
And are those initiatives growing in number? Because I mean, Etienne is talking to us about only 30% of healthcare companies are actively engaged in ESG initiatives. Is this growing? Are you seeing a change?
Yes, it's a new trend, and most of them are still at the starting phase, basically, and they're still exploring the feasibility studies. They're still undertaking the feasibility studies, and others are following the suit. So yes, it's interesting to see what the captains of the industry are doing in this area.
That's a good example. And so, Etienne, I mean, you've outlined for us some of the trends that you've noticed in terms of sustainability in the healthcare sector. I'm still stuck on the 30% of companies. I think that number needs to grow. But then what are the barriers? It's interesting. In your explanation, the way I translated that in my mind is almost as if because we're involved in the healthcare industry, we get a get-out-of-jail-free card. What are the other barriers? Perhaps are there structural barriers or other things that are preventing companies from engaging more?
I think that whilst we engaged with a lot of the CEOs, they did start realizing, exactly as Crystal said, that this is an imperative. It just hasn't been a priority. I think, especially if you look at the healthcare sector, the last 3 years have been a little bit chaotic, and we seem to be coming out of that. The good news is that coming out of that, people are reimagining how they do their business and what their operating model looks like, taking ESG into account. Now, what I don't want to say barriers are, but what we've seen specifically in the healthcare sector is whenever you have an incentive for someone, then suddenly the behavior does shift. And it's probably not only in the healthcare sector. But we will not be surprised, and in speaking to various players in the industry, from the Department of Health to a lot of the medical schemes, administrators, your big hospital groups, we will not be surprised that moving over the next 5 years in South Africa, that there is a ESG scorecard as part of all of the tender processes, which is going to clearly drive the right behavior. Sometimes it's a bit of a carrot and stick, which you have to apply. But, making it clear up front when you do go out on a tender, even for the medtech companies, in terms of your service providers, your logistics companies, in terms of what their ESG scorecard is. And no one's going to start off with an amazing ESG result. But as long as there is a plan in place that you know that your service providers are measuring their ESG and their footprint and what their plan is to improve that, I think we are automatically going to see a positive behavioral shift in that manner.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're already seeing initiatives like this on the JSE, for example, where they have the sustainability index, where they're looking at companies and how they are actually engaging in their ESG objectives. But one thing I'm quite curious to hear from you, Crystal, is are you seeing particular sectors or industries that are leading the way when it comes to waste management?
Yes, yes, there are many sectors that are already doing that. So recently because we are in the regulating side, so we've recently promulgated the exclusion regulations. So basically what the exclusion regulation does is we exclude some materials that are already having a way to be beneficiated. So we've already excluding them from the definition of waste. So by that we're already removing the red tapes that we're always hearing from the industry, that government is always coming up with red tapes that if you want to beneficiate some waste material, you still need to get obtain an authorization or a waste management license, which takes a rigorous process to undertake in order to obtain those authorizations or licenses. So those waste exclusion regulations were meant to remove some of those barriers. So already in that, there are some sectors like the construction and demolition industry. I'm sorry. The construction and demolition industry, they've already embraced the regulations. We've seen the ash generating industry, they've already embraced the regulations. We've seen the biomass production industry there. They've also embraced the regulations, and those materials, although they are waste, they are excluded from those red tapes, basically. So that's the little we are doing from the government side too.
So what are some of the lessons that the medtech sector could learn from those industries in your observation?
Yes, I think it's important that we may not take everything to landfill, so we need to try as much as possible to beneficiate the materials or the waste that we generate. So, because there is still value in waste, because you cannot always see waste as waste. Waste is a resource, and resources are not, they become, until you attach value to it. Because if you see it as a commodity, then you attach value to it, then it becomes a valuable commodity, and you can beneficiate it, and then we move waste up in the waste management hierarchy, which it is an international adopted principle in waste management, and divert a lot of it from being landfill or being disposed of.
I like what you're saying, that waste is a resource, and in a way I want to bring this broader, seeing ESG and sustainability as a competitive advantage. Etienne, do you see this as being a way that companies could look at ESG initiatives and sustainability as an actual operational business competitive advantage?
Absolutely, without a doubt. And I like the point that you raised with regards to investors. So when we deal with a lot of investors with new deals, mergers, acquisitions, some of the key questions that they're starting to ask is with regards to what is the ESG culture, and what is the framework, and what is the plan to improve the scorecards. And interestingly enough, I was speaking to some colleagues from some of the hospital groups, and they said when they are employing young graduates into the hospitals now, some of the questions which the graduates are asking are, well, what is this organization's ESG plan? Which shows that the new generation is much more aware and attuned to actually what is happening with regards to ESG than what we give them credit for. So organizations can, if you have got that good plan, not only are you attractive to investors, but also to future resources and employees which are going to join your organization.
I find that very cool. Christel, looking at the last couple of years, I mean, we've undergone, I said it yesterday, I keep saying it, 2 crazy years. The COVID-19 pandemic shifted a lot of things for many industries and the healthcare sector quite tremendously. What have been some of the changes and impacts that have happened when it comes to your area of focus?
Oh yeah, thanks for bringing that. With COVID, we've seen a lot of waste being it increased the amount of infectious waste that the industry has been treating throughout. So I think it increased it by around 10%, for infectious waste. alone. And we've seen treatment facilities moving away from using combustion technologies like your incineration technologies, starting to use non-combustion technologies like your autoclaves and hydroclaves. But we have a limitation when it comes to that kind of technology because according to the South African policy, non-combustion technology cannot treat anatomical waste. So it's your limbs, basically, or human tissues, because, I mean, we're considering the issue of the ethics in there, because it wouldn't look good, because when you are treating anatomical waste using an autoclave, for example, it's like, you are literally taking maybe some piece of meat into a microwave. So we're thinking about the people that are operating the technology and where the materials are supposed to be disposed of. And then in South Africa, as you know, especially in landfill sites that are operated by municipalities, we have a problem of people that are scavenging, looking for recyclable materials in there. So just imagine if they could be scavenging through those materials, and then they come across that like a barbecue or bride limb. It wouldn't look good. So yeah, those are the changes, the shifts we are seeing at the moment in the industry.
And Etienne, from your perspective, did you notice any notable changes with regards to sustainability, healthcare, that have been impacted by COVID, whether worse or better?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's for the better that people are a lot more aware of they need to change their operating model, as I mentioned. And one of the ways which we have seen this happening, specifically in some other developing countries, is the output or the waste of one healthcare organization can be the input for another healthcare organization, which is speaking
Circular
exactly
economy.
to what Crystal said. And we've seen it work quite well in some other countries, whereby they create this micro city, healthcare city, production city, whereby you don't need to move the waste very far. It actually just becomes one seamless conveyor belt of an output over here as an input for the next development. So it speaks to local manufacturing, it speaks to renewables, it speaks to job creation. So there's a whole new approach in terms of how you can set this up for a sustainable healthcare organization or environment. And I think the political will is there, the organizations are there. It is going to take a very big concerted effort and collaboration in the public and private sector to get there.
This is very cool. Where is this currently being done?
So we're seeing it in quite a few of the Southeast Asian countries, so Malaysia, the Philippines, and initially it was just a trial, in India as well, just a trial, but I think COVID accelerated that, and specifically the healthcare sector saw that we are over-reliant on India and China with regards to imports across the sector in the healthcare industry. So that probably is going to be piloted on the African continent. We deal with quite a few of the big donors, and all of them have expressed interest on local manufacturing and sustainable manufacturing. So these are some of the ideas and some of the models which we want to pilot with them on the continent.
And what I particularly like with this is that it solves several problems at once. On the one hand, you've got reduced logistics, literally smaller distances, so you're reducing your footprint there. You're also engaging in localization, local manufacturing, local supply, but also it's very much a circular economy where, like you say, the output becomes the input for another organization. Now, if we were to integrate something like this in South Africa, which places would be a quick win? Like, where could we do this?
I think if I knew that, it would be, it's much easier to sit here and hypothesize about it. But I think that what we need to do is we need to start small with some pilot. And we've already seen during COVID that there has been a lot of collaboration on the manufacturing side. There were some great examples where there were some plant some car factories which were repurposing their plants to help with ventilator production. So there's a lot of creativity that can happen, but we need to start small. There's no way this is going to be a big bang approach where you can just set up this whole infrastructure and hope it works. I think organizations need to start small and start partnering and collaborating with similar like-minded organizations that can be a mutual symbiotic relationship between them.
Absolutely. Christel, I see you nodding. Have you heard of this? Have you seen this? Do you have additional examples of best practices or ideas that we can implement here?
Yes. There are a lot of hospital groups, basically, that are, because ourselves are more on waste beneficiation. So we see a lot of hospital groups. They are partnering with waste management companies to recover and beneficiate these waste materials. Yes.
Brilliant. I'm going to open up to the audience. If you have any questions that you'd like our panelists to answer, you're welcome to raise your hand and the mic will come to you. Oh, I've got questions already. Okay, this is testing my eyesight. What are key elements of a simple plan for a medtech company starting on this journey? Who would like to take that? Etienne?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think the key elements are just start somewhere. Start with a plan. If you look at the ESG, there are numerous frameworks in the public domain with regards to all three pillars, and it's very important that all three pillars get equal attention. What we have seen, especially in South Africa, is that the S and the G gets a lot of attention from the healthcare sector, and the E gets neglected. So make sure that you focus on the E, the S, and the G equally. Put the framework together and just start somewhere. Just start measuring your basic KPIs initially, and start discussing with your service providers, with your partners, so that there is an integration of what you are trying to do to your extended supply chain, to your extended service providers as well.
And we've got another question, which I think, Christel, is for you. Down the line, will government be implementing ESG targets that industry will have you meet? The NHS in the UK is implementing non-procurement from medtech companies who have not met non-procurement from medtech companies who have not met certain targets or measuring their climate impact and the impact of their down-the-line supplies. I think that's actually for both of you.
Yeah, maybe let me attempt it. I think, yes, we are already looking at implementing those ESG targets. We are working with colleagues from climate change. We have already developed the climate adaptability and resilience strategy. So I think that is contributing to that, and the carbon taxes and a lot of other instruments that are there to ensure we achieve those ESG targets.
Brilliant. We've also got international sustainability models are advanced. Are these models that SA look at to inform SA policy, or do we need an African model that meets SA challenges?
Yes, I can already attempt it. Yes, we always benchmark what we are doing with the international practices, so we are not left behind. So we are already considering to. Our policies and legislation is informed by what's happening around. So yes, we are already adopting those international best practices.
And Etienne?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely agree that we do look at what's happening internationally. It will take a little bit of a hybrid between best practice, what's maybe happening in a developed country, in terms of how we implement it here, but there are lots of great examples, as I've mentioned, in developing countries, Latin America, Southeast Asia, the subcontinent, where we can look at some of those success stories and try and adopt those, bearing in mind what the overall frameworks are from developed countries.
Now, one aspect that I've always been curious on, and that comes up a lot actually on my show from different perspectives when it comes to ESG, is that on the one hand, we're a growing continent. We're trying to grow our local manufacturing. We're trying to industrialize. We're still growing. And on the other hand, a lot of these initiatives are initiatives that are maybe modeled after a more, let's say, Western society where they're not growing as much, or maybe they've grown too much. So how do we balance that? And especially when we're looking at it from a healthcare perspective, you've talked about the get out of jail free card, where on the one hand it's like, well, it's the healthcare industry, we're doing good, we're saving lives, and you want to continue to be able to do that at scale, whilst at the same time trying to do that in a sustainable manner. So how do you work that tension? How do you grow and be sustainable?
So I think that what is critical is that we do acknowledge that it has to be different on African soil. What's great is that we can learn from the mistakes that have been made in some of the developed countries, and we've seen it in health technologies as well, where we actually can leapfrog a lot of the developed countries. You know, so there are some fantastic health innovations, digital innovations coming out of Africa, which talk to African problems, which maybe the West haven't even thought of, but they also do sit up and take notice. So it's vitally important that we, as we are growing and we have this growth agenda, we see the mistakes that have been made in some of the developed countries and we don't repeat those, but we come up with those solutions that are going to be practically implementable on the African continent.
And Christel?
Yeah, maybe to add on Mr. Dreyer's comment. You see, sustainability is all about striking a balance between those three pillars, the social, environment, and economy. And it's always challenging to always try to strike a balance, because sometimes when you advance the other, you do it you take or you affect the other component in there. So striking the balance between those three pillars, it's critical in achieving sustainability and looking at those sustainability goals, basically.
Okay.
Yeah.
So moving forward, talking solutions and way forward, what is the quick win that we can implement? I mean, we've got a lot of leaders in the room here representing various organizations. What's a quick win when it comes to driving sustainability in the healthcare sector? Etienne.
So I think what is a fantastic opportunity, and I've had several discussions with the SAMED board and with Tanya, that industry organizations put their collective heads together and come up with what is the industry's approach towards an ESG framework. So let's start off in South Africa. What is the medtech industry approach? What are all of you who are members of SAMED? What are you willing to aspire to? Are we going to set targets? Are we going to have a general consensus in terms of how we measure ourselves as a sub-industry in the healthcare? And that already, getting the collective brains together, focused in the same direction, I think it's an amazing opportunity and definitely a quick win that we can focus on.
Absolutely. Christel?
Good one. I think, when we're developing these technologies, I think we must design for longevity, basically, so to buy time and try to increase the lifespan of these technologies when they come into operation. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing, I think we should design for recyclability. So when these technologies reach their end of life, the materials used to design these technologies should find its way to be beneficiated than for it to be taken straight to a landfill, because we are running out of landfill airspace. So recyclability in there and longevity are design considerations that needs to be really considered.
Okay, thank you. We've got another question coming through. Climate change must now be the world's biggest public health threat. What proportion of CO2 emission comes from healthcare? And what will we do specifically in South Africa's healthcare industry to reduce and to lead?
So we looked at the healthcare sector globally to try and understand how big the problem is and how big of a culprit the healthcare sector is. And sadly, if the healthcare sector globally were to be categorized as a country, we would be the fourth largest country emitter of CO2s in the world. which is an absolute indictment on our industry. But it just shows that there is an absolute sense of urgency for the healthcare sector globally to change this. I think that with regards to how South Africa can lead in this, I think we've got a lot of really innovative minds in the healthcare sector. We've seen some fantastic solutions coming out even during COVID in the public sector and private sector. And we have got an opportunity where we can really come up with an innovative approach that is probably more suitable to our problems, but that the rest of the world can sit up and take note of.
Brilliant, thank you. Christel?
Yeah, I think from our climate change adaptability and resilience strategy there, it indicates that the waste management industry holistically contribute around 4% of these what do we call these greenhouse gases, which CO2 is part of. And I think with those, especially combustion technologies like the incinerators, they need to invest in the back-end system, like the pollution abatement technologies in there to try and clean up these emissions, because before they are released into the atmosphere. So much investment into improving the back-end system of combustion technologies.
Okay. Tanya, yes.
Maybe just more of a comment. I think that what we're doing here in South Africa it's a really good way forward. I think there's still a lot more to do. But I think we are sitting potentially on a huge problem when it comes to the rest of the African continent. I mean, WHO suggests that at least 80% of medical equipment is donated into Africa. And often that equipment arrives broken, or it arrives and you can't use the electricity supply because it's not the same standard as in the country where the donations have come from. And so that equipment then gets put onto a landfill or it gets incinerated. So the very good it was meant to do actually causes harm, and very often it's incinerated in areas where there are, informal settlements, and so people are harmed because those emissions are really, really harmful. So I do think that we need to look at things slightly differently here in Africa to how the Western world is in terms of dealing with these emissions. And I think also as local manufacturers of medtech, locally, we need to really start thinking carefully about the products and the raw materials that we use in the products. I mean, if you just think of COVID, I can't imagine how many ventilators are lying, not used, and what they're going to do with all of those ventilators and the emissions that they're going to cause once they incinerate them, for example, or, put them into a landfill, or if a whole lot of them have found their way to African shores, and the harm that they're going to do down the line. So it's something that we really need to seriously consider as the medtech industry, both locally and internationally.
Thank you. So how do we solve, or how do we tackle the adverse, harmful effects of this? Do we have solutions or ideas?
I think that there are lots of solutions, and you can hear some of them which definitely have been promulgated from the government side. I think to Tanya's point, across Africa it is a bigger problem. But the good thing, what we are seeing, especially post-COVID, is that a lot of these donors and donor organizations, which previously have just been donating products or equipment, they've changed their tune considerably, whereby they are focusing on health system strengthening initiatives, so building up the local capacity, and also a huge focus on local manufacturing across the board. We've done projects in Africa researching how local API, active pharmaceutical ingredients, can be manufactured on the continent, with regards to innovations, with regards to medtech, sourcing locally, producing locally. So I think that the world collectively, who have been the donors, has woken up to that. And they are starting to drive a lot of these initiatives. But it's going to take us to come up with a lot of these plans and to almost push the agenda, that they know that we have got a plan in terms of how we will deal with it, that they don't have to come with a solution up front.
Now, a lot of what you mention requires capital, I'm sure. When we're talking strengthening local production, strengthening health systems, when we're talking also just running ESG initiatives within company and within government, how do we build, or rather improve, the investment case for ESG in healthcare in South Africa?
You want to go?
I'm making it an open question because I know it's loaded.
Nothing to ask difficult questions. But now I want to run back to what Tanya has raised. It's a very important thing that, Africa has been, Africa as a whole, as a continent, has been used by these developed world as a dumping ground of hazardous waste, basically. And so normally you'll find they will donate materials in the disguise of, it's a donation of some sort, but they know that kind of donation already, it has reached its end of life. Maybe you may use it for a year or two, and then that particular thing is no longer working. So we were left with a burden of managing that particular waste. So the developed world, from back in the days, they've been using Africa as a dumping ground, as a quick solution for them to get rid of their waste materials. But through government, internationally, we developed the Basel Convention on Transboundary Movement of waste. Of waste. So there we control the import and export of hazardous waste. So in that we are able to say no, these kind of materials, because in terms of the convention, we cannot accept the materials that we cannot handle or deal with, or that we do not have the capacity to deal with. So I think that brings some sort of a cushion to say we can no longer accept some materials. Yeah, so, but the problem is they still donate it as a usable good, because the convention only applies to materials that are only waste, not the materials that are products. But we are looking at that too also with other stakeholders.
So how are governments approaching this? Do they look at how much life is left, and is there a framework for that?
Yes, there's a stringent framework for that, and the importer should demonstrate that they will be able to handle the materials instead of taking the materials to a landfill, so they can be able to beneficiate it, basically, because what we are interested in is beneficiation than landfilling waste materials.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay. Yes.
Maybe just to add to your question with regards to our organizations looking at the ROI of an ESG model, absolutely. And we've seen where we've helped to develop these ROI models, very often it's not a case of what you're going to get back, it's what you're going to lose if you don't do it. So do you run the risk of losing key contracts and key investors? And can you access additional funding through having a clear ESG plan and incentives in place? So there definitely has been a huge shift, especially from the C-suite in South Africa, in terms of we actually don't have a choice to do this. We're going to be left so far behind the curve if we do not implement an ESG. We know that the benefits will be there in the long run. And there are various models that you can calculate in terms of your opportunity costs, that if you don't do something, what you're actually going to lose if you do not have an ESG and all your competitors do have it in place.
I really like that way of looking at it, what you'll lose versus what you'll gain, because it's a complete paradigm shift, and it's actually the right way to look at it. The opportunity cost, what it would cost you, what you'll lose if you don't move ahead forward with this. So we're now going to take closing thoughts, closing comments, and if there is one last question, we'll take just one from the audience, and then we'll do closing comments.
Great. Good morning. Thank you so much for this great discussion. My question is really around innovation and local manufacturing. I bring this up because, as we've said, there's quite a bit of over-reliance on importing, and what we really want to do is take a look at local manufacturing. But what I've also found, if I look at the master's project that I had to do, it was around a nanoparticulate drug delivery system. A lot of people in my lab were producing 3D printed implants for kidney disease, etc. And I look at those colleagues, and while it's great to see them in local manufacturing or in other multinats doing advancing some of that. What would have also been nice is if they started their own businesses, right, and started a lot of these aspects. And it's really testament to our ability to innovate, because many people actually filed patents on behalf of WITS for some of these innovations. So what I wanted to ask is, how can we encourage young people or innovators really also working to start their own businesses and showcase our ability to innovate, particularly in health also?
Thank you. Great question.
Yeah, I think I will attempt it from the government side, because I think what is the government doing to encourage youth to be part of these innovators? I think the DSI is, I think, Department of Science and Innovation. They have an agency in there. It's called Technology Innovation Agency. Yes, Technology Innovation Agency. So the sole mandate of that agency is to support youth to innovate, and they support them with research, feasibility studies, as well as finances. Yeah, and there are also other financiers, like maybe to mention the IDCs and others. Like the small business development, the Department of Small Business Development, I just forgot the full name there, but yeah, the government has established all these agencies to assist individuals, or specifically youth, to innovate and start businesses in this area, basically.
Okay. Any other comments, Etienne?
Yeah, so I think that there's probably been a misconception in the healthcare sector that there isn't space for SMMEs, because it always seems as though it's the multinationals, it's your big healthcare organizations. But there absolutely, as Crystal said, there's such an opportunity for SMMEs to thrive, and it's encouraging to hear that the government has got initiatives like that. But I think that the private sector also can start their own initiatives with regards to funding opportunities like that. I took part in what was called a hackathon, and I didn't know what a hackathon was until I had to adjudicate it, where they took healthcare students, medical students, which were faced with a problem, as well as IT students, and they put them together for 24 hours to come up with a digital solution. And 3 of those digital solutions were implemented in our public sector, one at Groote Schuur and 2 at others, with regards to emergency trauma. So the opportunity is there, and private sector can get involved in this and start their own programs that parallel and mirror what the government's doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a huge fan of hackathons. Yes, Tanya.
So the title of this session was actually Sustainability, Inclusivity and Diversity. And we've spoken a lot about sustainability and waste management, but I think, Etienne, if I can put you on the spot, research has shown that organizations that are diverse and inclusive are more sustainable, and they're more successful. So what are some of the thoughts that you can give the audience in terms of how to improve your inclusivity and diversity?
Absolutely, and I totally agree. We've done so much research around what makes teams successful, what makes executive teams successful, and diversity comes up time and time again. Now, when I say diversity, it is not just with regards to racial and cultural diversity, but it is with regards to the personalities that you have as well. It can be people who are extroverts, introverts, people that are creative thinkers, structured thinkers, and ageism also. We've come across quite a few boards who have actually started focusing on making sure that they have the wise grey hairs on the board, but also the young, innovative thinkers on the board, because they do balance them out really well, and they're more effective. How organizations can do this is, I think it's important that you put diversity and inclusion at the center of what you do. Don't have it as something on the side that, we must carry on with business as usual and then hope that our diversity and inclusion comes right on its own. Put it at the center of everything that you do. Every conversation, don't shy away from it. Obviously, we've got a whole lot of scoring metrics with regards to that. but also make it a lot more inclusive, that it is not just pigeonholed towards, you have to have a BE scorecard and then you are diverse and inclusive. But there's so many other ideas and aspects that you actually can look at in terms of creating that really creative culture in your organization, and one that just fosters continuous improvement and acceptance of different ideas.
Thank you. We've got time for one last question. I saw one right at the back. If you can raise your hand if you have a question. Okay, then we'll do closing comments. Christel, would you like to start?
Yes. Thanks for that opportunity. As I said, the name of this conference, it looks at technology development, and as I said, let us design these technologies for recyclability. Let's ensure that the materials used to make up these technologies are recyclable, and let us design for longevity, because we don't. These single-use type of technologies, and they contribute much to the waste streams that we're having. So, if we can design for longevity, we buy some time for a technology to be able to be operated time and time again. I think that's the message I can leave with the delegates in here.
Brilliant, thank you. And Etienne?
So I think my final message is everyone can start somewhere. You don't have to wait for this big plan and for it to get approved. You can start small. And ideas on how you can start small, we've seen organizations where something as simple as their travel policy gets completely changed. That every single air ticket that gets booked for a staff member gets added up to what the emissions are, and they've got a target for the year that they can manage within that, so that they actually start managing what their footprint is from a travel perspective, and also starting to, as I mentioned, apply that to a lot of the service providers which they use for their business as well.
Brilliant, thank you so much. That was the first panel on what sustainable healthcare looks like in South Africa. Thank you so much to my panelists. Please join me in giving them a big round of applause. Etienne Dreyer, PwC, and Christel Baloyi. Thank you so much for joining us.